intended, Norm, to read from the message for the scripture today, but I was really just struck by how different that is and how fresh that sounds really coming from the message. And so it was just a pleasure to hear it almost for the first time as Norm read it. Those of you who don't know me, some of you might know that I'm actually kind of famous for wearing bow ties. And I just love that there's so many people here who's pilfered my bow tie collection to honor me today and wear my bow ties. And this shirt's got too small of a neck for me, so I wasn't able to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. But it was just a pleasure to see that, so thank you for honoring me that way. But it's ironic, really, that I'm wearing a bow tie today, usually, because I was actually a construction worker before I became a pastor. For half my life, I wore a tool belt, and it did a really dangerous job, actually. I was a sheet metal worker, an architectural sheet metal worker, and oftentimes that meant I was up in really high places working with really sharp pieces of metal and in very dangerous situations. I used to joke that it's like working with 10-foot-long razor blades in windy conditions right near the edge of a roof while walking on a slick rain surface all the time. And that's, just kind of waiting for trouble. But that was just a job that I did most of the time, and that's how it often looked. And if you didn't like heights or you fainted at the sight of your own blood, let me just tell you that being a sheet metal worker is not for you. Just would not want to just faint and roll off the roof or something. I mean, it just wouldn't work. So lots of people, carpenters and stuff would get splinters. I would get stitches. That was just how my job worked. So this trade usually involved me putting the finishing touches on a building. Whether that's an aesthetic, seismic joint, or something like that, I would put these trim pieces and various finishing touches on the outside of the building. And, it really put me in a place where I had the opportunity to design things and to troubleshoot and to find my own way to do something that maybe no one had ever done before sometimes. And it was really exciting because I felt like my job was kind of a connection between where science and art met. It was a beautiful thing, and from a high-rise to a strip mall to $1 million homes, I came to realize in my work as a construction worker that it's really a human hand that puts every single piece of a building together. None of this, that we see around us is an accident. A human was there, and everywhere on this whole building with their own hands putting the stuff together so that it could become this one thing that we're worshiping in today. And so with the exception of making movies, probably building is the most expensive art form that humanity has ever known. And there's a beauty in that, the design of that, the way that it's all put together from start to finish by a plan. Something that helps me to see, how the big picture works and how craftsmanship works in real life is lived out. And so I got to work on being a team, with other people and working in an orchestrated way so that we're not stacked on top of each other. We're all moving together at the same rate. In the Lego movie, which I actually preached twice this week, and both of them had a reference to the Lego movie. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. But there's this scene in the Lego movie where all these characters, they need to escape from the villains, and they're trying to build a submarine because that's the only way they'll get away. And so, they got all these different characters from different Lego universes. You got like the Batman guy, and he's trying to build a bat submarine. And you got the Lord of the Rings guys trying to build whatever a Lord of the Rings submarine would look like. And you got this like Hello Kitty knockoff character who's trying to build like a pink princess Lego submarine. And the main character, he looks at what they're doing, and they're all just talking about what they're going to do, and they're going to proceed without him. But he warns them. He's like, you can't build all of that at once. You have to have one plan to go forward as you build this thing. And no one listens to him. He hasn't really risen up to be the hero of the movie quite yet. And so as they cobble together all these different parts of the submarine together and they put it in the water, it goes down pretty quick. You don't have a plan that unifies the whole thing together. It doesn't matter how skilled the workers are, what you're building together won't last. It's just a fact. And so they have that experience, and their whole submarine breaks up into a million pieces, and they find themselves floating in the ocean waiting to be rescued. I think church sometimes can be that way. We can be so cut off from each other and so cut off from a unified vision together that we're building together with God, that we are so disconnected. We fill our lives full of so many things, especially parents, chasing, panting and chasing after all these sporting events and all these opportunities that kids have. We fill our lives so full, and the first thing that suffers when our lives are this full is our relationships with one another. We don't have those connections that maybe 20, 30 years ago the church had, because we fill our lives so full. And so, a monthly meeting, and many of you have probably been to a monthly meeting. We have a monthly business meeting with potluck and everything. And at monthly meeting, we have all these different committees and people who do ministry at the church, and they give a presentation about kind of what they've been doing or what they're about to do. And it's really designed to unify us, to bring us together. But I think sometimes all you ever see is these individual parts, these individual committees, that sometimes you can lose focus about what the overarching thing that keeps all those, the parts that we're all moving together is supposed to be. We had a meeting yesterday for the first time in a long time where we had the heads of various committees, and we talked about that, the vision, the unifying vision God has for this church, because we have to say no to some things to say yes to the right things. We can't do everything. So we have to have that vision. We have to listen to God and discern what His vision for this church is, and to join with Him in that work. But sometimes we're so scattered. We miss the forest for the trees. And so, we forget sometimes that buildings require things like blueprints. No element of a building exists apart from its plans. You can't just build a wall wherever you like. It has to fit into the big plan. It has to be something that works with the system, the whole building as a whole. It has to fit into the greater purpose of that building. And so in the ancient world, as you see this picture of the temple behind you, Peter uses this wonderful metaphor of the church as a temple. In the ancient world, when they built buildings like that, they were essentially just a big stack of rocks that were cut to shape. And if even one little rock, or one of those rocks at the bottom was cut a little bit crooked, the farther you get up, the more likely it is that your building is just going to fall over. This had to be a precise thing, so every stone was cut to fit its place. And so, each stone has its purpose, and each stone is laid out and fit together, not only with the big picture, but with the small picture in mind. And that's really the kind of church that God is building, where we can see the parts and we can see the whole with clarity. And so, in our text today, it's often famous for the reference to the priesthood of all believers. And I think that's a very important doctrine, a very important part of who God is, but we miss sometimes the metaphor. There's the metaphor of the church as a priesthood, and then there's the metaphor that Peter uses of the church as a temple. And we always look at one and forget the other, because we're so, as Protestants, and especially as Quakers, I think we're so keyed into that priesthood of all believers idea. We take it so much farther than maybe some other denominations have. And so today I want to lay that part aside and really focus on this idea of the people of God as the temple of God, as a building that God is building together for His purposes, to demonstrate the glory of God to the world. And so this metaphor is often overlooked, but God is calling us to be like a big spiritual house, a holy priesthood. We're now offering spiritual sacrifices to God that are acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And so often in the church we say the church isn't the building, the church is the people. When I was a little kid, we had a little hand motion thing that went with that, with a steeple and everything. We flip our hands, and we're so good at saying that the church is the people. But those people are built together as a temple of living stones. So we are, in a sense, a building that demonstrates the glory of God to the world. And our spiritual gifts, I invite you as we go into this, looking at ourselves maybe as a temple, I invite you to think about your spiritual gifts and how they are cut and fit together by God to build God's spiritual house, to build God's his demonstration of His power and His glory in the world. And so in various forms of the temple, in the Old Testament you had the tabernacle, which was kind of like a pre-form of the temple. It was a moving temple that moved around with God's people. And then it grew into Solomon's temple, which was a big, giant structure like that, and later Herod's temple, which was built to recreate it as the temple was destroyed. And the temple was a holy place. It marked the boundaries between the holy and the profane. It was where atonement happened. It was the very dwelling place of God. And we, as God's people, are now the very dwelling place of God. You know, the temple was at the heart of the relationship between God and his people. It was the meeting place, really, of heaven and earth. It was the place where sin was cleansed and offered blood-covered sacrifice. And only a certain tribe of the most elite priests were ever really allowed in the temple. And even there's this part of the temple, the heart of the temple is called the Holy of Holies, and it was only entered once a year. The priest would go in there and offer sacrifice to God after offering sacrifice for himself. And this sacrifice was for all the people. It was to atone for the sins of all the people. And the high priest would go into this place. They actually tied a rope around his leg because only he could go in there. And only he could go in there once a year. And if the high priest offended God in this holy place that he would go into, and God, say, struck him dead, how would you get him out? You'd have to wait another year to go in there and get him out. So they tie a rope around the guy's legs so they could drag him out if it went bad, if God didn't accept the offering that was given to him. And so, but now in the New Testament, we see that all the rules are broken. The temple veil has been torn, and God's Spirit isn't bound any longer to a physical location like the temple. His Spirit moves through us as we move through the world. So the stones, rolling stones, gather no moss, so to speak. That's kind of the new model of the temple. And the people are the temple, and that means for us, every day is Yom Kippur. Every day is the day of atonement. We carry with us at the heart of our spiritual walk. We don't need the sacrifices of the temple anymore. We are the sacrifices of the temple in our spiritual offerings to God as we seek obedience to God. We seek to dedicate our lives daily to God. And so within this context of the temple as metaphor, I invite you to think about how you fit into this thing that God is building in his church. We're each like stones cut and placed by God that are perfectly fit together. Like clay in the potter's hand, we offer ourselves to God as a living sacrifice, resting on Christ as the foundation. So we must all decide whether we're going to first build our lives on this foundation or not. Peter reminds us that those who trust him will not be put to shame, but some people decide not to build on Jesus' foundation. And as the people God puts in our lives and calls us to witness to are often offended, we just kind of hold out hope for them, waiting for them to desire to build their life on Jesus. The gospel of Jesus is an offensive thing. The cross, the incarnation, these are all a scandal. And I think we try to water that down and minimize the impact of that when we do, just to reach people. But the Scripture calls us here in 1 Peter to look at Jesus as a rock of offense, as something that not everyone is going to appreciate. Not everyone is going to fall in love with Jesus and walk in his way. Not everyone is going to build their life on that foundation. They might pick a different foundation that they like better. And unfortunately, that's not going to turn out so well. So we don't get to choose how people respond to God and his offer to come and be a part of what he's doing. But we shouldn't give up on people either. We have no idea how it's really going to turn out in the end or what God is building in his plan. And so as we go out into the world and go wherever God calls us to be, first we have to put ourselves in that position to be used by God, to let go and let God work through us and create in us exactly what he plans. Let go of our own plans and be a stone that can be shaped, a living stone, can be shaped by a living God. And so I think sometimes people need us to be like a stone, to be something that's tangible, that they can reach out and touch. Sometimes people need Jesus with skin on. They don't just need the mystical Jesus that we, find in open worship, who's this person who's a presence but not a physical presence. And I think sometimes God calls us to be that presence for other people, to be willing to be seen, to be felt, to be touched, to be that living stone that God uses to be in a place, to reach out to the people around that place. And so as Christ Church, we are a temple of living stones. We're built on Jesus. He foundation of that temple, the cornerstone that marks off the boundaries and the limits of our ministries, and rises us up above the shifting sands below. And we are built on Jesus. We're built by Jesus. I mean, he is a true master builder whose plan it is that we're following. And lastly, we're completed by Jesus. He is the chief capstone. He is the last stone to be laid. He's the reason all the other stones are there to support Jesus, to lift up him and the work that he's doing in this building. So how do you function in this temple of living stones? Are you a visible part on the outside that people see? Are you pointing the way to God at the center of this temple? And then everything that we do here at College Avenue Friends? Are you a gateway that makes room for new people to come in? Or maybe the courtyard of the temple that allows people the space to wander and taste and see that the Lord is good? Or are you perhaps a little bit more structured, You're part of the part of the church that holds things together or separates things apart on the inside? At the heart of the temple, everything revolves around sacrifice. And at the center of that heart, God's presence is made manifest among us. So how do you fit into the spiritual house? Have you found your place? Or are you still waiting to find that place that God is shaping you for? Some of us are called to be pillars, and some of us are called to be cobblestones, and they're all important. They all contribute to this big whole that God has. Heard a story of a man who brought his daughter to a parade. I've actually done this before, but because his daughter couldn't see, he lifted her up and put her on his shoulders. And I think when we think about the legacy of the church and the reason it's all here, we all are held up by other people. We are all holding up other people in this big building that God is building. But as we sit on the shoulders of giants, we talked about in the early meeting, we have this privileged view. And we can either appreciate the privilege of that position, we can simply be a burden. We're each called to choose how we will be as a part of this thing that God is building. We're going to support one another and lift each other up. We're just going to be weight. So I encourage you to think about that, to think about the ways that you're lifted up, the ways that you are holding up others in this thing that God is making. There's this German word called Gestalt, and it is a fancy word, and what it really means is that a thing is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think we should see the church that way. The church is greater than just the sum of its parts. It's part of something far bigger, something that extends through time, something that will outlive us and go past us, something that God has been doing for a very long time, but at the same time it's here now. These living stones that shift around as the church moves forward into where it's called to be and when it's called to be. And we're all a part of that. We're all part of something greater than ourselves. And often, I think, in our culture and in our time, we often look at the church as something that how is this going to suit our needs? I want religious goods and services that can be bought and sold. I don't want to be part of something greater than myself necessarily. We might think as we church shop and bounce around and try to find our place. But I want to challenge you to think about that, to think about not only the ways that you're served by the church, but the ways that you serve the church. The ways not only that you're supported by the church, but the ways that you are called to be a part of what God is doing and to support the work of the church as a whole. For us now, every day is Yom Kippur. Every day is an opportunity to offer spiritual sacrifice to Christ and offer our gifts for what God is making. And every day, in all that we do, God can be at the center, just as he was in the temple. Not just as the life of our individual blocks that he's making, but also as a foundation, as the capstone, and as the master builder behind every stick, every stone, every piece of the work that God is calling us to do. So as we go into this time of open worship, I invite you to do something a little bit different. I have these prayer stones that I stole out of the prayer room. And I invite you to come up and grab one if you're able or willing, and take it back with you as you go into this time of open worship. And, I want to take another offering today. We already took an offering for money, but this time what I want you to do is think of yourself, the giftings and the callings that God has for you. And I want you to offer those gifts back to God. Not just your money, but yourself. So as you take the stone and think about it as it represents your gifts and your callings and the ways that you're open to let God use you, I want you to bring that stone back up and set it up here on the rail. as an altar. Just when you're ready, when you feel as if you're really ready to release those gifts and callings into the world to be fully shaped by God into what He's building. So that's the second offering this morning to go into this time.